Hi everyone, this is Mindy Eggen and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm playing with a new stamp set from Gina Designs, and this one is called Just Breathe. I really love all the lotus flower images on this stamp set, and I had two ideas for cards that I wanted to share with you today. I'm going to be doing a little heat embossing and ink blending, of course, and share one of my favorite tricks for doing a background with your ink blending. So here's a look at that stamp set called Just Breathe. It has four lotus flower images on it, plus the lily pad and some sentiments. So the first thing I'm going to do is stamp out these images. So I'm using all of the flowers on the stamp set. I have them on the Gina K Designs layering white cardstock, and I'm prepping this with my anti-static powder tool. Now, normally when I do embossed resist, I have either clear to have a white outline or use white embossing powder. But today I really wanted to keep black lines. So I am stamping this in the Obsidian Amalgam ink. This ink is great for so many purposes, but another great trait of it is it stays wet long enough to heat emboss. Now I'm stamping this image or these images 4 times to make sure I'm getting some really good crisp lines. And I'm using my Stampin' Bug tool to just help kind of move over the surface of my Misty tool. Then I'm taking some clear embossing powder and I'm going to sprinkle this over all of the images. I'm going to know that the image is completely covered because instead of that bright black that I'm going to have, it's going to be kind of cloudy looking. I have my heat tool warming up off on the side, and once I know it's nice and hot, which I usually give it about 20 to 30 seconds, I'm going to come in quick from the back. I just do a quick sweep on the back, and then I come to the front and I melt that embossing powder. When it goes from that cloudy look to a shiny look, I know that the whole thing is heat embossed and I can move on to the next image. I'm going to move on to my ink blending, and to start with, I am using Lemon Drop ink, which is a really nice light yellow, and I have a media grip mat that I just placed off on the side so it sticks to my glass surface and I can place my ink pad on that. Now for my ink blending, I'm starting out with just doing the center of the flowers, and then these other two flowers, I'm doing the very outer edge. This is where mini ink blending brushes come in super handy. I do have to reapply ink a little bit more often, but I'm able to control the area a lot better than with a larger blending brush. Next, I'm going to come in with a light carnation and I'm going to go around those outer petals. I don't want to come in too close to that yellow because I really don't want to make orange. I really kind of want to have that significance of a yellow center and a light pink for the rest of the petals. So quickly going around all of those, and I'll do that to all four of the flowers. To add a little bit of contrast to this, I'm going to come in with a darker shade of pink. And for this one, I am using dark carnation. There is a medium carnation, but I wanted this to be a little bit more significant. Instead of having that gradual change, I really wanted it to be a dark pink on the outside of those petals. You can also see that I'm tapping off a lot of that ink off on the side. I don't want to come in too strong. I just want a light coating on the very tips of these petals. My heat embossing had protected those black lines, so because it resisted the ink, I'm just taking a paper towel and going over that to remove any of that excess ink. Then I'm lining up the coordinating dies, holding them in place with the Spellbinder's Best Ever Craft tape and running these through the die cut machine. And you could see up in the right hand corner, I had created another sheet so I have multiple flowers to use for two different cards. So now I have this beautiful pile of lotus flowers. The first card I'm going to create using these flowers is going to be kind of on the softer side. So to start with, I'm using the Swiss Dots embossing folder and I'm using some 80-pound white cardstock. Now I'm using my Platinum 6 die cut machine and I have the extended plates here. So I have the A plate, B plate, my embossing folder, and then the adapter plate. And just running this through the machine and it's going to emboss beautifully. Now I did hold that down with a little bit of tape at the very top, mainly because I wanted to make sure that my edges were straight because I don't want to place a frame over this to die cut it. I wanted to be able to trim this down myself. So that tape just kind of helped ensure that everything was going to be straight on this cardstock. Now, my ending trimming that I'm going to have here is going to be the 3¼ by 4½. This was a little bit bigger, but I came back in later and trimmed it down to that smaller size. Now I'm going to attach this to the front of my card using foam tape. And notice I am putting the foam tape On the textured side, I wanted to have the debossed side, I think that's called, facing the front up. So I didn't want to have that texture towards the front. I hope that made sense. And after I remove the backing of the foam tape, I'm going to add this to a card panel that was created out of innocent pink cardstock. Now, I afterwards decided that I wanted to have a lily pad to kind of ground my image a little bit. So I did do that off screen, doing the same process by heat embossing with the Obsidian ink and clear embossing powder, and then just ink blending that with some greens. So I took one of the lotus flowers and attached that with my tape runner. So that is going to be one of my main focal points, and that would have looked great on its own right in the center. But I thought it would be really pretty to have a couple of these coming out from the top and the bottom. So I have my main one in the center there as kind of a placeholder. I added some tape runner to the back of one of those flowers and added that towards the top. And then for the second one, I added the tape runner again and placing that underneath. And I'm trying to just visually line this up so that the margins are even at the top and the bottom. So once I have that in place and I press that down to kind of make sure it's secured in place, I added white foam squares behind the centerpiece. I removed the backing and then just using my tweezers, I'm going to place this on top. So it's going to have that little bit of dimension. For sentiment, I'm going to use the mixed messages sheet. There's one in black and one in white. And I really love these to just quickly add a sentiment to the front of the card. So I'm trimming out the hello friend using my mini paper trimmer and just trying to eyeball it pretty much to get it even on the top of the word and the bottom. I'm going to take a black Copic marker and go around the edges because these are printed on white cardstock, but it's black on the front. So I want to make that cohesive all the way around. Then I added black foam squares behind that and placed this over the center of that image in the middle of my card. My finishing touch to this card is going to be using the clear quartz sequins mix. I have like 2 or 3 bags of them in this plastic container off the side. So I just scoop a little bit out into a triangle tray and then I pick them up with my pickup tool and just place them about where I think I'm going to want them. Once I'm happy with the placement of that, I can just dump these from the triangle tray back into my container so I don't lose any. And then I'm using my Connect glue that is in this mini applicator bottle and add that to the front of the card. So that is card number 1, very soft and delicate. But now we're going to jump into kind of a more intense background because this is where I really just thrive. I just love making kind of these large contrasting backgrounds. Now, one of the easiest ways to create a background and make a full panel ink blended background is to use colored cardstock. It's probably one of my biggest tips if you want to do a card like this. So I started out with powder blue cardstock cut to 4¼ by 5½, and I started out by ink blending blue raspberry. I'm going all the way around the edges. Now this one is my larger blending tool, and I'm having it kind of fade off towards the center. Now I'm going to bring in the navy, so it's going to be a little bit darker towards the edges. I'm not going to go in as far with this one. I kind of want it to have that gradual fade. Now, also keep in mind that these inks are going to dry back a little bit. So if you find that you're not getting enough contrast and you wanted to make it pop just a little bit more, I would suggest coming in with either a black, just a little bit of black, or you could use a dark purple or even a brown. Now, after that's done, I want to do a sentiment over here off on the side, on that right-hand side, but I know my cardstock is super wet right now. I did not let this sit very long just yet. So I have this in my Misty tool, and I have my flowers arranged the way I want them so I could place my sentiment. Then I'm going to just pick that up with the door of the Misty. Now, one way to test this to see how wet it really is I am going to first prep it with my anti-static powder tool, and then I'm going to sprinkle on, this is just some clear embossing powder. And notice how there's a ton of it sticking on right there. So that's telling me my cardstock is really wet yet. So I wiped that embossing powder off and I'm coming in with my heat tool. This heat tool has 2 settings. There's a heat setting and just a low setting. So I'm just going over it with that low setting, let that ink dry. I'm going to bring it back to my Misty. I really don't need the Misty right now, but I just have it there and I'm sprinkling on the embossing powder again. So that embossing powder slid off the cardstock, which is telling me that area is nice and dry and ready to be heat embossed. So I prepped that again with that anti-static powder tool because I was touching it and handling it. So I prepped it again. Now I'm stamping the sentiment in embossing ink, and I am going to stamp it twice just to make sure I have good coverage with the ink. And then I'm going to add some gold embossing powder, and this is the Gina K Designs Fine Detail Gold Embossing Powder. So I'm going to sprinkle that on, tap off the excess into my scratch sheet of paper here, and then once my heat tool is again nice and hot, I can bring this over and I quickly go over the back and then bring it up to the front and melt that embossing powder. Now, before I attach my flowers, I want to add some splatters to this. So I'm bringing out my splat box and I have a post-it note that I'm just kind of ripping it down to the size that's going to cover my sentiment. The reason I do the sentiment first is because it's a little harder to get crisp stamped results and heat embossed results when you're doing it on top of splatters. So I prefer to do it this way. Now I am using this Copic Opaque white, which seems to be pretty good. I think I found my perfect white for adding splatters. And I just added a little bit of water to my work surface with it, taking that paintbrush and kind of going around the center of that cardstock and being very careful how I do my splatters. Now, something I've been dying to try out with my splatters is this Ayuli watercolors. I'm probably not saying that right, but they are so gorgeous. Now, this is the Galaxy palette, and I'll have that link down below in the video description. These watercolors are seriously amazing. So I'm using this silver one. I added a couple drops of water to it, mixed that up with the paintbrush, and I'm splattering that around that area again. Now, this silver seems to really soak in the water. There are other ones I played with off screen that the water kind of sat on top a little bit. This one really soaked up the water, so I had to add a couple more drops here and there to really get it moving. I did try and speed up that process a little bit of drying those splatters with my heat tool. I probably could have let it sit just a little bit longer, so I'm being a little careful with my flowers. I have them arranged on the front of the card, so they're kind of doing this almost C shape around the sentiment. And then I'm adding tape runner to the flowers that are going to be in the furthest back. Now, the one that I'm going to add foam squares to is the largest one out of the bunch that's kind of closest to the sentiment. So I added the white foam squares behind that. And then I'm just going to use my tweezers once again to kind of help align that to make sure it's not covering the sentiment. I'm not going to add any embellishments to this because I think the splatters do all the work. So here is a close-up look of those gorgeous lotus flowers, and I love that pink with the blue background. I think it's just really eye-catching. I hope you enjoyed today's card projects. I will have all of the supplies listed down below in the video description and over on my blog as well. If you're not already a subscriber, I would love it if you subscribe to my YouTube channel if you enjoyed today's videos, and be sure to hit the bell notification so you're notified when new videos are posted. Thank you so much for joining me today. Here are a few other videos I think you might enjoy.